So, hello and welcome to the All Stats Aren't We season preview 21-22. I'm John McKenzie, as always, and I'm joined by some of the other chaps. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go around everyone in order on my screen. So, we will start with you, Tom Woodhead. How are you? It's nice to see your face. We don't often get to see your face in these recording sessions, but how are you?
I'm not too bad. I brought another laptop into the studio just so that everyone could see my weird red face. Yeah, it's good. I'm not too bad. Looking forward to getting a proper football underway after the slightly underwhelming pre-season.
Yeah, slightly underwhelming, but we are going to be positive, and who better to do positivity than Darren Driver? Darren, how are you?
I'm very well. Actually, what I was about to say was I'm really not ready for football to start again. I wish it had just pissed off for 6 weeks, and then I can feel excited about it. But there's been no time for the excitement to build. So I'm relying on you chaps and particularly you, John, to to light the fires of my excitement tonight. And if you can't do it, I'm sure Jacob will. So yeah, but I'm good. Cheers, buddy.
Light the fires of your excitement. That must be a line from Springsteen.
It's not, but it should be, shouldn't it? Light the fires of my excitement outside the factory door. There we go. We'll make it that one.
There we go. And the young, sprightly face of the team's. I assume you're actually, maybe you're not the team's youngest member, but we'll go with that anyway because you have a young, sprightly face. Jacob Stanbridge, how are you? Welcome to the first live stream for you, I think.
Thanks very much, John. I'm all right, thanks. Should we do a round poll of everyone here? Am I the youngest?
Well, I think it's between you and Tom Alderson, so
I think it's
definitely not me, mate.
I'm 26. How old are you, Tom?
I'm 23.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, there we go.
There we are.
But
what a lovely segue! What lovely segue to bring in
Yeah.
Tom Alderson. So, Tom, how are you?
I'm good because I've not paid any attention to pre-season, so I'm probably more positive than most people. But yeah, I'm definitely in the same boat as Darren. As I need another 6 weeks off the football. I can't really be arsed with it yet. But here I am on a preview podcast for the season.
Yeah, well, you haven't seen any of the pre-season. You're in for a bit of a shock, my friend, when you look over some of those results. But we put the pre-season behind us now. We can still say, well, it's pre-season. It doesn't really matter. The important things are in front of us now. And that is what we're going to talk about today. We are going to talk about the future season that's coming up. I say that the first thing on our running order is pre-season, which I've just dismissed. But we'll go to some people who have watched the pre-season. What's the general feeling on pre-season? Is it the case that pre-season we can just say, well, pre-season is as pre-season does? How is everyone feeling about pre-season? I'll start with you, Darren Driver. What did you make of the pre-season?
Yeah, it's sort of. I was really pleased to see signs of life against Villarreal because some of the games previous to that had looked really pretty shonky in a number of ways. I think sort of pre-season's been marred by a number of individual errors leading to goals, and I'm hoping that that's just the players getting that stuff out of their system. In terms of like the general performance and the tactical stuff, I really don't read too much into pre-season, and I never really have. So I'm just really hopeful that Bielsa's got the team tuned in terms of fitness and in terms of where he needs them to be for Saturday, and that they come out of the blocks as we're used to seeing at the start of seasons under him. And he's never done a good pre-season in terms of results and performances. So I'm sort of, I do kind of hold on to a glimmer of hope from that point of view, and that maybe it'll be Saturday that lights the fire of my excitement.
I think the other thing that I noticed was that this is the first pre-season where we've played quite a few decent teams as well. Normally we've had one sort of decent team right at the end of the pre-season, and we had Manchester United in Australia as well, obviously. But generally, we've played teams that are below us in terms of level and still not done very well in most of the pre-seasons. We've had bad results even against teams like York and things like that. So hopefully, hopefully that the fact that we didn't play so well against Betis and Ajax, well, definitely didn't play well against Ajax. That's more of a symptom of the fact that this pre-season we've stepped up the standard of opposition more than anything else.
Does anyone have any worries about the season off the back of the pre-season as well. I mean, it's easy to dismiss, but there were some worrying signs in there. Does anyone have any in particular that they wanted to talk about?
I think the obvious thing is that we talked a lot at the end of last season about Rodrigo's pressing, and it looks like there's every chance that he's going to start in the midfield on Saturday, given that he has in the last couple of friendlies. And I still, really consider that to be a really worrying thing that he may be fitter than he was last season. He may be able to put out more physical output, and I hope that is true. But I really haven't seen any indications that kind of he's improved his awareness, his spatial awareness, really, in terms of the defensive side of the game. So I think that is a bit of a worry, particularly against a team that were able to unpick us in quite so comprehensively last season in the same fixture.
And I think considering that Dallas is probably going to be playing at left back as well, if you do have Rodrigo in midfield, Dallas is possibly the best partner because he can cover that space in behind a little bit more, whereas with Click and Rodrigo, as it seems like it's likely to be, there were quite a few games last season where that combination really left us exposed on the counter. I mean, was it those two in the 6-2 against Man United?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess what we're really hoping for is something that's not like that.
Yeah, and I guess if Dallas does play at left back, we've seen the fullbacks inverting quite a bit more in pre-season, haven't we? So that might give us a little bit more of a defensive cover than definitely that we got at Old Trafford last year. So maybe there's something in there. I don't know.
Jacob, I'll give you the final word on this because you have watched the pre-season as well. Anything that you've picked up on from the pre-season in particular?
I think I largely just echoed the stuff that the other guys have said. I'm probably a bit reticent to read too much into the results or anything, but and I just really want to stress that pre-season's about the team getting back into sharpness and freshness, and there's been a lot of noise coming out of the club that is happening, and so I would be encouraged by that even though there are things that still worry me.
Yeah, of course. Well, as this is a live stream, I should say that if you are listening to us, feel free to make a comment, make your views known, let us know what you're thinking, and send questions our way, and we'll do our best to go through those. But I think rather than dwell on the pre-season, I think the best thing to do is for us to jump into our pre-season preview. Our season preview. Let's get it right. And I think we are going to approach this in the same way that we did last time, rather than sort of doing a general pre-season coverage. What we're going to do is we've picked out some hopefully interesting hypothetical questions. Some of them are over-under questions. Some of them are which will happen first questions. Some of them are comparative questions. Who's going to do better in this metric, etc. But hopefully, as a result of that, we will be able to cover quite a bit of the various things that are going on in the season, and you'll get a good sense of what it is. So let's start with a nice basic question. It's an over-under question, and it's on last season's finishing position. Last season, we finished 9th in the Premier League. The question is this: will we finish over or under that position this season? And I looked down the list of the answers that you guys have given me. Everyone has gone for under. So Tom Alderson, we haven't heard from you much. My favourite line. So let's start with you. You're going with under. Why?
I just think that the squad isn't really any better. If you could even argue it might be worse than it was last season. And I think a lot of the teams that were in and around us have improved. So I would say that they're all going to take a sort of enough of them are going to take a step forward that we're going to take a step back. And I just kind of think that we were probably as good as we possibly could have done last year. And I don't think we're going to get, I don't want to say luck, because there could be an element of luck to it that sort of again. So I just think we'll take a step back, which isn't a bad thing. I think that would still be the best thing. Like be a good season as finishing below 9th, as long as we don't get relegated.
Has anyone else got any thoughts on this? I mean, I guess we're all going to be fairly reticent to go above that 9th figure, because I do think it represents what was probably a best case scenario in many respects for last season, especially given, as we've talked about a lot on this channel, the potential overperformance defensively at the end of the season. Is there anyone who's particularly worried about this season? Has anyone got a vertiginous collapse on the cards for their season predictions, or is everyone just generally going for a sort of solid, maybe similar sorts of levels of performance, but probably somewhere more like a reflective position finish of maybe in the bottom half, but quite high up?
I think you've got a fall in mind, haven't you, John?
Me?
Yeah.
No. Look, I think we'll be fine. I think we'll be fine. I think it will be similar to the last season, but I think there will probably be a little bit more variance. I think there's not many games I can think of where we were unlucky not to get a result, and I think there was a few games where we were potentially lucky to get a result. I think between those two things, we'll probably, like I say, perform at a similar level and maybe just variance down. The only thing that I worry about is that if we have any players who sort of fall off a bit of a cliff performance wise. I know that Luke Ayling, for example, is a player who some people have been a bit worried about this preseason. If we had a player like that who I think performed lower than they did last season, then it could maybe tweak things a little bit. But anyone else got any thoughts on the over under finishing position?
I just think linear progression can't go on forever, and since Bielsa's come in, we've improved in terms of performance every season, and I think at some point it's reasonable to kind of see that that ends. Last season I predicted we'd finish between 9th and 13th. This season I think between 11th and 14th, and I still think that's a massive achievement given the state of the squad. And I just kind of really want to stress that although I do think we'll finish below, I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. I just think it's part of the natural ebb and flow of a newly promoted team that hasn't kind of massively improved the squad over the course of the summer.
Yeah, and as you can see, Thomas saying there, the natural position in the table feels around 14th to 11th, which I think is what you said, Darren. But yeah, I don't want to dwell on this too much because I think there's not going to be much disagreement. So let's move on to the next hypothetical, which is we're going to look at points in the league or goals against. So last season we finished with 59 points in the Premier League and we scored 54 goals. We conceded 54 goals. I suppose this is an interesting one because the question is if we did overperform defensively, and I think in the last 10 games, I think we conceded per StatsBomb data a level of a goal less than you would have expected in each of those 10 games. So that's 10 goals fewer than you might have expected. So we could be talking anything up to 64 goals there, which would be swinging things the other way. So I do think that this is an interesting question. I will throw this out to Tom Woodhead. What do you feel about this one? What are you going for?
Well, I've gone for points mostly because everyone else seemed like they were going to go for goals, but I actually think that the points and the goals against will be quite similar. I've gone for points just because I think we potentially in the first half of the season might be a little more solid defensively than we were in the first half of last season. And I know preseason hasn't played that out at all. But when we have a fully fit squad and when we have our first choice players in all their positions, if that ever happens, I think we probably are set up to be a little bit more defensively solid than we were in the first half of last season. So, again, it's a very close run thing, though. I don't think there's going to be much in this one.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any thoughts on? I'll get to you, Jacob. But what's your take on this one?
If I'm honest, my logic was quite similar to Tom's, although the pendulum swung the other way for me. I guess pre-season has made me wonder if we might be perhaps looking to be a bit more open than we were by the end of last season, but I don't know how much of that is just an effect of Rodrigo playing or whether it's a tactical thing. But I do agree with Tom. I do think it'll be close. I just sort of went the other way partly because of that large XGA overperformance at the end of last season.
Yeah, it's quite tough. It's quite tough, isn't it, to actually judge where finishing position and points and goals conceded all fit together. So this is a tough one. I think I'm in the same camp in that I've gone with just the assumption that we will probably concede a few more goals next season, just on the basis of, even if we performed at the same level, we would presumably concede a few more goals, and so that would suggest that maybe there would be slightly fewer points and slightly more goals against. No one else really disagreed with that, I don't think. Has anyone else got anything they wanted to add, or should we move on here? Right, well, let's move on to another over or under, and I think this is I think we will call this the honorary Josh Hobbs question, because this is about Bamford Premier League goals. Over under on Bamford's Premier League performance last season, which was 17 goals, wasn't quite enough to get to the 20 goals mark. I suspect most people are going to be negative on this one, because 17 goals was a fantastic rate of return for Bamford. Darren, I see that you've gone over and you've written which is wildly optimistic, already covering your back, but talk us through your reasoning on this one.
There is no reasoning, really. It's just blind optimism. I just want him to have that season where he finally gets all the twats off his back, gets 20 goals in the Premier League and shuts everyone up once and for all. And then it's more about wanting that than necessarily expecting it to happen. I think 17 goals last season was an outstanding return. I think he'll probably get somewhere there or thereabouts again. And hopefully the 3 goals that he had ruled off by VAR last season won't happen this time, and that'll make up the difference. But I think he'll have just as many chances to score as he did last season, and I think he'll take a really good proportion of them again.
I would suggest, Darren, that the phrase "once and for all" means that you don't understand football and how people react to it.
Oh, I know, but I'm trying to be hopeful and positive, Tom. That's all.
I think with Bamford, the interesting thing is that people assume that his good season last season was like an outlier season, which is, I guess, open for debate. Obviously, Josh wrote that piece before we played in the Premier League, suggesting that the style of football that we'll be playing in the Premier League will suit him a little bit more. And I think that largely bore out last season. Does anyone think that won't be the case going into this season? Does anyone think that we are going to see a wholesale shift of the way that opponents are playing against us that might impact Bamford?
I don't know about wholesale, but I would say that certain effective ways that opponents have of dealing with us often mean that Bamford can get quite isolated up the top. And there are definitely games, I'm thinking like around the time just after we beat Man City, like the Liverpool and the Man United game, when people were saying, oh, Bamford had a really bad game, but it was more Bamford didn't get on the ball, but because the team wasn't functioning as well in an attacking sense. So I guess depending on I don't think it's going to be a massive difference either way, much like any of us do. But I think as teams wisen up to what's the best way to deal with us a bit more, perhaps it will be a little bit less.
I guess the other thing is that Bamford was basically not injured at all last season. I think he miss one game with a kind of hip thing or something, but it's quite rare that a player won't miss a few games. So even that would mean that it's probably likely that he'll have fewer opportunities to be on the pitch and score goals.
Yeah, and as Zach Palmer says in the comments, the positive side of Rodrigo playing a lot more this season means that Pat will likely have more creativity behind him, which could really help him, which I think is true. I guess, my questions would be simply whether or not we start seeing teams finding us out, which is a horrible phrase, but I think we've seen elements of that this preseason, albeit with the caveat that Tom said, which was we're playing much better teams at the level of both of coaching and also personnel. So I do wonder whether or not we see some teams adopting the sorts of tactics that cause us problems. That said, I also think there's a lot of Premier League clubs who sort of play the way that they play, and they assume that Leeds are a mid-table side, and so they won't do too much to try and break them down as well. And we saw that with, I think, maybe the way that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer approached the second game against us last season, where he largely tried to do exactly the same sort of thing against it. But other than that, we all said Bamford is going to maybe slightly underperform, which I think, underperform last season, which I think is again in line with the fact that we're saying that this season probably will be slightly lower, at least in terms of output, than last season. Let's move on to talk about the fourth question, which is touching on Rafinha, I'm trying to get the sort of big topics in early on. So last season, there were I think one of the big issues that we faced was injuries to centre backs. I spent some time today on Transfermarkt looking through and trying to work out how many games that Leeds had lost to our 4 centre backs. I didn't even include Gaetano Berardi. So our four centre backs last season missed 42 games between them, which is a remarkable figure. And I wondered whether or not we think that number this season will be higher or lower than the number of goals, assists, and nutmegs that Rafinha will get next season. By way of context, last season Rafinha got 20 goals, assists, and nutmegs. So the big question is, how many games do we think that we are going to miss through injury this time round through centre back? So Tom Alderson, I'll start with you on this. What's your thinking on here?
So I went for centre backs, and that's despite the fact that I actually think Rafinha's going to he will have a better season next year. I think he I can't remember how many games he missed for the first, because he arrived pretty late in the window, didn't he? So I think that number 20, I think, will go up. And despite that, I think that we are so cursed at centre back that we are going to miss the centre backs are going to be injured more than that. So we're still looking at probably 30 times. So I think the optimist in me wanted to go for Rafinha, but I just think we always end up getting injuries at centre backs. Like Cooper and Llorente are both pretty injury prone, aren't they? And I'm not sure if Cox's actually injury prone or he just had that long injury last year, but it just feels inevitable that the centre backs are going to miss large chunks of the season between them.
Does anyone want to add to that? Anyone want to hazard a sort of figure? Because 42 is a remarkably high figure. I think. Most players would probably miss like 5 or 6 games. Even looking at Robin Koch, you mentioned, he has surgery on his knee, and I think he misses fewer games than Diego Llorente in the course of the season. So he manages to come back from knee surgery quicker than Llorente managed to sort of play out the season. So I don't anticipate us getting anywhere near that amount of number, that sort of figure. But I do think that we will miss some. So anyone want to sort of hazard a rough kind of guess for what they reckon it will be?
I guess the thing is, we don't know the extent of Llorente's current injury, right? Like, he might already have an injury that's caused him to miss 10 games or something, and we just don't know about it. So that's why I sort of erred on the side of caution with this and said the centre backs, because we might already have Llorente missing for a large chunk of the season. We just don't know it. So as has been said, Cooper always misses quite a few games every season, so that adds up. But I find like trying to predict how many games some people will miss through injury, you're just guessing, really, aren't you? I don't think it's the kind of thing that you can have an educated guess at, unless someone disagrees with me on that.
I wanted to know what Tom Alderson's statistical and theoretical background for predicting a curse was, and for stating that it was a curse. I want you to show you working out there, Tom, if you can.
You wrote it in the notes and I copied you.
That's true.
Let's talk a little bit about Rafinha, because he's obviously the other side of that question. And I suppose the other side of that question is, do we think Rafinha is going to over or underperform his output last season? So Jacob, what do you make of Rafinha going into this season?
Certainly on the point that Tom mentioned about just when he came into the team, I think that's the first thing you need to mention, because he debuted against Wolves, so it was only game 4, but it wasn't until after that international break against Everton, I think, when he got his first start. So it was a good chunk of minutes there. I think Everton's game number 10 of the season last season. So just within that time, you would feel that his productivity would have to go up. But even beyond that, if there's any sort of scope that the team gets more attacking fluency than it had in maybe the second half of the season, and particularly towards that chunk where we were playing all those big teams back to back, then you would expect more to come from Rafinha just because of how much goes through him. There was that piece in The Athletic recently about expected threat, and you saw that Rafinha was our absolute outlier for that. So I would expect to see more from him with just A, if there's any change in style, and B, him playing the whole season.
But given how much goes through him, you would think that other teams would start to mitigate against that and really try and make sure that he doesn't get in the game as an attacking force. And that's my big concern about him this season, really. I think he will have a better season, but I don't think it'll be quite as big a jump in terms of output as we might hope for.
Rafinha's also had a fairly quiet pre-season as well, so I wondered if anyone was sort of reading much into that. I think we maybe chatted about it the other day, saying that Rafinha seems to be the sort of player who's a bit more performance driven. So in games where it matters, you might expect to see a little bit more from him. But does anyone else have any worries about Rafinha going into the season?
I don't think I do. I think you still see enough of the basic stuff there in the preseason stuff that I've seen. It's just that sometimes that final ball hasn't been right or his passing's been slightly off, but you can see that the vision's still there and the technique's still there. So the thing that I was wondering on what Darren was saying was, I definitely see that that's the case, that people will be targeting him more, and that might reduce his impact on games, but I'm not 100% sure whether that will reduce the amount of goals and assists it'll get, because in our team, a lot of the assists, it's not the great pass isn't always the assist, is it? You know, it might be the pass before the assist, so Rafinha doing a little cutback on, in the box might not, the fact that he's being targeted might not change that, and the same with him getting on the end of something. So not sure if that's true, but it's something to think about, I guess.
We know that he really likes attacking the box. Like, he's been really effective as sort of like coming in as a sort of far post and things like that. So even if he's sort of targeted out of the not targeted out of the game, but if he's targeted for him as a creator, maybe more of that responsibility ends up on some of the other players, and he ends up on the end of things more.
Yeah, it feels like the really creative stuff he does from deeper, right? Like he those kind of raking crossfield balls to Harrison and or whoever's playing out on the left, or just those sort of balls that he absolutely twats that sometimes look awful but quite often look really, really nice. But they're often from much deeper positions, so they wouldn't be likely to result in assists anyway, I guess.
Yeah, let's move on.
One thing I wanted to add on that one was that we haven't sort of considered that there is a chance that we might sign a winger. So like if Noah Lang comes in or Ryan King comes in, Rafinha might end up just playing less games. You'd expect it to be Harrison to drop out most of the time, but if Rafinha gets less, he might end up playing the same amount of games as last season, just by the fact that he's on the bench because Kent and Harrison are playing, or Kent and Lang are playing. But that relies on us getting a transfer in, which doesn't look very likely at the moment.
Yeah, no, and it will be interesting to see how this all plays out, no doubt. But let's move on to the fifth question, which is again a comparison question. So two things that we've talked about a lot on this channel anyway. Firstly, goals conceded from set pieces. So the question is, do we think there'll be more goals conceded from set pieces next season, or Stuart Dallas starts in central midfield? Obviously, again, we've talked a lot about Stuart Dallas in central midfield as well. I think that the general consensus would be that we would probably try and bring someone in to the central midfield spot. At least maybe a backup player, so he would have the option to be able to play Dallas at either one of the fullbacks should the needs arise, and we've already seen that happening in pre-season with Junior being injured. So Darren, we'll kick off with you on this one actually. Before you start though, 15 goals from set pieces last season and 20 centre midfield appearances from Dallas. So I guess the big question is whether or not Dallas gets quite so much in the centre midfield spots, and whether or not you really think we've improved from set piece conceding.
No, I think I've said quite a few times on this channel that I don't really see a kind of necessarily a trend line in terms of our improvement from set pieces. I think we will go through periods in the forthcoming season where we concede quite a few goals from set pieces when we come up against teams with really good delivery or great movement in the box, or where we come up against teams that have got movement which is designed to pull all of our players to the front post and get someone in at the back, or something like that we will still concede quite a high number of goals. I guess I'm hopeful that the midfield signing that we bring in will get quite a few games. I think I'm sort of thinking that it'll be broadly the same, like a high scoring draw. I think we'll probably concede a similar number of goals from set pieces as we did last season. and it looks like Dallas will be starting the season at left back at least, and it'll be interesting to see. So I think we'll be somewhere around the same, somewhere around 14, 15, 16, that sort of area for each of them.
Tom Alderson, you've just written a piece on the set pieces from last season. So what were the general takeaways that you found in that?
Yeah, so I think we conceded 15 set piece goals last season, and our expected goal against the set pieces was around 15 as well. So even though people seem to believe that we improved as the season went on, that I don't really think that was the case. I just think we got luckier from set pieces. I'd agree with what Darren's been saying, that I think 15 set goals from set pieces is definitely a possibility. Again, I would see it around that. So I've gone for set pieces with this one, just because I think Dallas will play less. I want to say fingers crossed, because he did a good job, but I think if we bring a signing in, he'll play less games, or he'll be covering Firpo, who's playing at left back. So I think it'll be around 15 again for set pieces, and Dallas probably playing a few less than that.
A couple of you have said Dallas for this one. I think, Tom, you were in that group. So, Tom Woodhead, what do you make of this?
I am not in that group. I said set pieces, not Dallas. But yeah, I think mostly based on the fact that we know that Firpo's injured, but again, like Llorente, we don't know how badly. So for all we know, Firpo's out for 15 games or whatever, and that's 15 games Dallas is playing at left back pretty much. So I just get, and I guess based on that really gives someone else an opportunity to stake their spot in central midfield. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Dallas in central midfield a lot this season, but probably more during the course of the game than starting is my guess. At least that's the trajectory that it's going to start on, I think. Yeah,
Jacob, you said Dallas, so we'll go to you on this so that we do cover the other side.
I guess I completely agree with what Darren said earlier, but the only maybe caveat that I might chuck in would be there was that period just before Christmas last year when we conceded, it was like 5 set-piece goals in 4 games. And during all those games, Luke Ayling was playing centre-back, and so we were sort of one man down in terms of the really, really good headers of the ball. I don't know how much necessarily having another centre-half in, well, if they're fit, would have an effect, but it's possible that there's sort of marginal gains with that, and I think it's just something we should consider when thinking about this. And I'm also of the opinion that Dallas is probably actually going to start quite a lot of games in midfield. I think Bielsa likes it.
Yeah, and I don't think there's going to be that many more options for players in there, and there will no doubt be the inevitable Mateusz Klich injury at some point. It wouldn't be an All Stats On We podcast if we didn't talk about expected goals. So I've thrown in an expected goals question, just a comparative one. And the question is, which will be higher, XG or XGA? So expected goals for or expected goals against. Last season, we had 57.5 XG created per StatsBomb, and we conceded 62.9. Who wants to kick off on this? Who thinks that we are going to maybe reverse that trend, come out of this season a little bit stronger in terms of production and a little bit stronger in terms of consumption, conceding?
Well, I think that I actually think they'll be roughly equal this season, which possibly means that I should have predicted that we'll finish in a higher league position as well. So I'm maybe not following the same logic with the two questions there. But in terms of the league position, to be fair, I did always think that we did have a chance of finishing higher. It was just a small chance. So I think we'll probably create about the same and maybe concede fewer big chances like those really wide open ones that we conceded, around that period leading up to Christmas and around Christmas last season. So that's sort of my rationale behind that.
Yeah, and for the record, everyone else went with expected goals against. Tom Alderson, you're just seeing the same patterns last season as this season, presumably.
Yeah, I'm pretty much exactly the same, really. If the numbers were very similar to that, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I think we'll probably perform similarly with XG and XG against.
Yeah, and I think that's what the underlying numbers suggested last season, and I don't think there's been any suggestion that the sorts of signings that we've made will necessarily upheave that in any way. But let's move on to start talking about the domestic cups, because I think this is a good area of discussion. I think every time we talk about domestic cups going into the season, people are very positive about it, and they say, "Oh, it would be lovely to have a cup run." I think it would be great for us to go deep in one of the cups, and then we promptly lose both in the first fixture. So let's kick off with the first cup competition question. So last season we had 3 0-0 draws in the Premier League, and we played in 2 cup games, both of which were lost against Hull and Crawley. So the question for next season is, will there be more Premier League 0-0 draws or matches contested by leagues in the domestic cups? Darren, we've not heard from you in a while, so what's your take on this one?
0-0s. I think we'll have more 0-0s. I think there'll be a similar amount to last season, and I think we'll also see a similar level of performance in the cups. For whatever reason at Leeds, Bielsa seemed to view the cups as unimportant and has kind of filled the team with younger players, and I don't see necessarily that there's been a kind of huge amount of improvement in that depth. So I anticipate a very similar level of performance in the cups going out in the first or second round of each one, for sure.
Tom Woodhead, you are a romantic man, and I know you have a romantic view of cup competition. You've gone with cups. Is that just wishful thinking?
I think it is partly wishful thinking, but I also think that it requires a lot less change for the cup games to increase than it does for the 0-0 draws. Like, I think it's unlikely that we're going to see 6 0-0 draws, for example, whereas if we win 2 games in each of the cups, then we see 6 cup games, which despite how unlikely it's far beyond, it's not beyond the realms of possibility at all. I don't think, even if you're pessimistic about it, we can play badly and win some of those games. So I would love us to take it a little bit more seriously. Like, weirdly, Bielsa seemed to take it a bit more seriously in our first season, possibly because he was still trying to get the players inculcated in the system. So there were certain first team players that were playing all the cup games as well, like Phillips, I remember, and Alioski, who just played all the games no matter what. But it would be nice if we would have a bit more confidence that we'll survive in the Premier League. So why not go for something else? I don't think there's much to be lost from giving that a go.
Anyone else positive on the cup competition? I'll take that as a no. We have some other questions about cup competition, so I'll just jump straight into those. So this one is a time-dependent one. So which comes first? Leeds dropping out of the League Cup or our first win against a Big Six side? So for context, obviously Manchester United we play this weekend. Then we have Liverpool on the 12th of September, Leicester on the 6th of November, Spurs on the 20th of November, Chelsea on the 11th of December. And then I got bored of looking up fixtures, so the list ends there. But in terms of the Carabao Cup fixtures, the first round that Leeds play in is the second round, which takes place on August the 24th and 25th that weekend. Third round is September 21st, 22nd. Fourth round, the round of 16, is in October 26th, 27th. Quarterfinals at the end of December, and then you're talking semi-finals in January and the final in February. So obviously there's a lot to get your head around there, but I guess this all comes down to whether or not you think Leeds are going to do well in the League Cup or not. Jacob, what's your take on this? Do you think that Leeds will go deeper in the Cup, or do you think that they will get a nice early win against the top 6 side?
I think it's more the case that whilst I have maybe optimism that we might get through the first fixture in the Cup, I don't expect that we progress considerably further unless the draw is such that we end up playing a quite full strength team. So I would kind of expect us to potentially fall out of that maybe the third round. And we aren't playing that many of these sort of fixtures prior to like the fourth round. And so, well, we could beat Man United this weekend. We could beat Liverpool, but I'm not confident enough of that to stake a claim in that respect.
Anyone else got any additional thoughts on this one?
blind optimism suggests that we're going to win one of those first 2 Big Six games for me, because otherwise, what's the fucking point in watching it? Yeah, so that's it for me.
Yes,
I'm not sure that's that optimistic of you, really. It didn't sound that way to me, but I'll take your word for it. And then obviously we have the FA Cup as well. So the question here is, obviously last season an inglorious dumping out of the cup by Crawley in a game that we saw a lot of changes for the starting 11. So the question for this one is, do we think there'll be more changes to the starting 11 for the FA Cup third round fixture from the previous game? I presume that means the previous league game, or Jamie Shackleton starts. So again, bit of FA Cup here, bit of Jamie Shackleton. Tom Alderson, we'll kick off with you on this one.
Yeah, I think these are a couple of things we've sort of learned over the last few seasons, that Shackleton's not going to play in centre mid. So if he's going to start, he's going to be a right back, and then would he start over Cody Dramé? Like, I'm not too sure. I just don't think Bielsa trusts Shackleton, to be honest. So I don't think he's going to get many starts. And like we've said in the last 2 questions, he's not going to take the cup seriously, you'd imagine. So he's probably going to be wild changes for that third round match. And I think that's going to be greater than the number of starts that Shackleton's going to get next season.
Darren, you've gone the other way on this one. What's your logic?
My logic is that I think Shackleton's finally going to have a season where he gets a decent number of minutes. I mean, now I've said that, I think he'll probably go out on loan. But I'm kind of banking on Shackleton getting 8 or 9 starts, perhaps, somewhere in the team, and 5 or 6 changes, maybe 7 changes to the team for the first FA Cup round. So it's a kind of display of my faith in Shackleton, as that finally he'll have a season where he gets his chance, and then doesn't immediately get injured. Although he has just immediately got injured at the end of a pre-season in which he'd done really well. So maybe it doesn't quite add up, but there we go.
Yeah, I didn't even know about that injury, Darren. So thanks for that.
That's all right.
What happened?
He took a really, really unpleasant knock to the back of the head and looked like he was out cold.
Ah, right. Yeah, no, I did see that actually. Yeah. That's but we don't
Tom
take concussions seriously in football. Yeah. No. Like, let him get a tumour. It's fine.
Jacob, you've got something to say on this, I think.
I also went with Shackleton, which was perhaps a bit of a hedge, but just because I was thinking back to the game against Arsenal in the FA Cup in the promotion season, and although we started Robbie Gotts, it was a largely quite full-strength team. There were a couple of changes, but I guess for the FA Cup, there's a chance that we could draw Liverpool. There's a chance that we could draw, I don't know, Marine, but we could draw Liverpool. And so I just wanted to stick a bit of faith for Shackleton for that, for similar reasons to Darren.
Anyone got any final thoughts on Shackleton going into the season? Tom Woodhead, you've not said anything really on Shackleton. You got any takes on him?
I would say that Jacob's previous answer is not really faith in Shackleton. It's just in faith in us not making many changes in the FA Cup. But I thought he looked really good in it. I didn't see the Villarreal game, but I saw the rest of the pre-season games, and I thought he looked quite decent at right back. And I disagree with Tom Alderson that Bielsa would play Drama ahead of him. I think Shackleton would be ahead in the queue, at least at first. And I think he's earned that. And I agree, he's probably unlikely to start in central midfield much. So I think what we're really talking about is Luke Ayling going to be injured a lot? And if Luke Ayling's injured a lot, is Stuart Dallas not, going to be needed elsewhere or not? Because I think Dallas would probably play there if he's not needed elsewhere. So the chances of both those things happening at the same time, I think, are relatively slim. So that's why I've gone for the changes.
Yeah, I think there are also chances though of Koch being needed in defensive midfield and Ayling needing to play right centre back because there are injuries there as well. So I think that's another place where Shackleton could gain some starts.
I'd like to see it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's move on and talk a little bit. We've got a time-dependent one again here, which comes first? Calls for Bielsa's sacking or the last signing of the window. This is a very negative one, I suppose. the window closes on August the 31st, so I think we'll get 3 games in before then. So the question here is, do we think that people will do we have a bad start to the season, and do we see people calling for Bielsa's head, or do we get a really late signing in the window as we did last season? So Tom Alderson, what's your take on this one?
Surely no one's going to be calling for Bielsa to be sacked after 3 games. Like, I think we had a similar question in the equivalent podcast last year, and I don't think there ever was a call for Bielsa sacking it at some point. So I'm just hoping that it's the same case again. Who knows? We might have already made our last signing of the window already. In which case, that we're all going to get this question wrong probably. So. I just don't see people calling for a sacking that early. It seems ridiculous, but I don't know, Leeds fans, who knows?
I assume, John, you are talking about Leeds fans rather than like pundits and idiots on Hotspot and stuff,
and not just outlier people. Like
I was going to say, are we talking about the lone dickhead? Because there's always one of them, no matter what's happening.
Yeah. I guess the real question here is, do we expect Leeds to have another strong start again, which has tended to be a commonality in the season so far under Bielsa. What's people's take on how we're going to start the season? Manchester United away is a tough first fixture. We've had a tough pre-season. Is there any worries that a bad first game could sort of mean that Leeds stagger on a little bit at the beginning of the season?
This is purely anecdotal, but I also have a feeling that Manchester United tend to start seasons badly recently. That might not be true, but that's the sense that I get. So those two things combined, I don't know. I mean, I think I don't think we'll lose all 3 of our opening games, put it that way. And unless we were to get hammered in all 3 of our opening games, I don't see any serious calls for Bielsa's sacking. And even if we did, I think it would be premature and a bit silly, to be honest.
Anyone got anything to add on this, or should we move on?
Well, there will be a deadline day signing, in my opinion. So that's the other thing that I just wanted to mention.
Yeah. I suspect there may be a late signing, not least because Lewis O'Brien is currently languishing in his bed from coronavirus, so that's probably going to slow things down a little bit at that end. Whether or not he comes in, I don't know, because no one tells me anything these days. But let's move on and talk about Calvin Phillips. So we did have a question in the stream actually from Joe Brennan before, who said an over-under a question on red cards for Phillips or LUFC crypto tokens bought by the All Stats Aren't We team. Well, I can tell you now that Darren's already loaded up his bank account full of crypto coins. So I don't think there's any danger of that one being won by Calvin Phillips. Our Calvin Phillips question is, interestingly enough, related to bookings. So it is referee related. So we've got, will Calvin Phillips get more bookings this season, or will there be members of the first team squad who make senior international appearances this season? Calvin Phillips made 10 bookings last season. I'm not sure how many first team squad players made international appearances, but I'm guessing it's probably not far off that.
I think it was 8.
Okay, yeah, that sounds about right. I think this is a bit of a toss-up either way, but what do we reckon on this one, Jacob, seeing as you've done the required reading for this question?
I guess my answer for this is perhaps pessimism on the availability of Calvin. It's that his shoulder injury concerns me, given that it's happened to him a couple of times, like in just the previous season alone, and I'm still not entirely sure what that statement about managing his injury conservatively in advance of the Euros really means. Whether we'll end up seeing something like what's happened with Marcus Rashford, and there be surgery at some point. And then on top of that, we know that Calvin does pick up the odd knock. I know some of that was his shoulder absences, but he does miss games from time to time. And even if he ever got a red card, then that's another game to not get a yellow in. And then, so I think it's possible that that we do see maybe a couple of bookings fewer, and then that puts it pretty much level with the number of players that we have who've made international appearances. And so for that, you just need someone to get an international call-up who hasn't. That could be Harrison, that could be Rafinha, that could be Strauch, but possibly not. but it's probably going to be
5
close.
different nations where he could actually qualify. So
Yeah,
probably slightly higher possibility with him. But yeah, I think you're right, and definitely the way that they were speaking about the Calvin Phillips injury when it happened at the end of last season was that they were going to be treating it conservatively because of the Euros coming up, which suggests that maybe if the Euros weren't coming up, they would have actually just gone through with the surgery that he clearly requires on his shoulder. So I suspect he's probably got something like a loose or torn rotator cuff or something in his shoulder, which obviously needs to be operated on, otherwise his shoulder will keep popping out. And I think it's a fairly simple surgery and will stop that from happening in the future. So whether or not they would just soldier on through the season and maybe risk it happening a couple of times, I don't know, and then try and get through to next summer and get it through. Either way, as Tom Woodhead would say, this isn't wildly hypothetical, but I suppose either way, you're still seeing him missing a few games there. Either way, anyone else got any thoughts on this? Anyone gone for Calvin Phillips cards over the other option?
I have gone for Calvin Phillips bookings, although to add to the players, to be fair, that Jacob was talking about, you could see a debut for Bamford. You could see maybe Meslier on the outside chance might get a cap. The same, I mean, even Junior Firpo, if he decides to, it's unlikely, but if he decided to represent the Dominican Republic instead of Spain.
You're so invested in this, aren't you?
Invested in what?
In Firpo playing for.
Have I mentioned it before?
I don't know. You've mentioned it a few times.
Maybe I have. I think
excited about it.
I think the first time I mentioned it, I didn't realise that he was also Spanish. So, but there was one more that I thought might have a look in, and I can't remember who it is now. I'm looking at the squad. Nah, forget it. If it comes, Yeah. Oh, the what's his name? The reserve keeper that we bought could potentially get a cap for Norway as well. So
yeah, no, that's true. And I think he was on the bench for a game, but then maybe was pulled off it because of COVID or something. But he was very close to something like that anyway. But he got the call up, but wasn't on the bench. Yeah. It wasn't that he was literally on the bench and they dragged him off. It wasn't quite that exciting.
Regardless, anyway, I went for Phillips bookings because he always gets a lot of bookings. So
yeah. Next question is a little bit straight-laced, but I think it's a good one because it's about Mateusz Klich and Tyler Roberts, two players who are constantly, well, certainly in the case of Tyler Roberts being talked about, but we've just gone with a simple one here, just who's going to get more goals, Mateusz Klich or Tyler Roberts. Klich got 4 goals last season, Roberts got 1. I think maybe some of the more negative people in the fan base would suggest that Tyler Roberts might never score again for Leeds, but I think this is a good question because Tyler Roberts, I think there's a lot hanging on him this season. He could do well, and I think it's an important season for him. So Tom Alderson, we haven't heard from you in a while. What's your take on the Klich Roberts goal continuum?
Well, I don't know if you mentioned it, but Klich's got 4 last year, Roberts got 1, and I just think Klich missed such a large period of time last season that I think I could see him matching that again, even with more games, fingers crossed. And I don't really have any faith in Roberts to get a load more goals, especially if he's playing midfield. I think maybe up front, if he got a run there, you might see him getting a few more goals. But this is more me hedging my bets that I think Klich's probably going to play more games and therefore have more chances to score.
Tom, what's your take on Tyler Roberts this season? Do we think that we'll see a lot from him, or has he blown his chance last season when he got a fairly good run in the side and there was injuries that sort of helped him out?
Is it me or Tom? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Tom Woodhead.
Yeah.
You're on mute, Tom.
I certainly don't think he's blown his chance, but I do think that it seems like Rodrigo has that shirt at the moment, and therefore you're probably looking at substitute appearances for Roberts in the near future at least. So, and Klich seems like he's going to be starting the season. So I think, as Tom was saying, just out of virtue of Klich playing more games and more minutes, I think he's likely to score more goals. If you were to tell me that they were going to play equal minutes throughout the whole season, I would be tempted to go for Roberts because I think he's unfairly maligned in a lot of ways and he is capable of scoring goals. And I don't think he's the kind of bottler that people assume him to be. But yeah, just purely because I think Click is going to play quite a lot more, I would go for him.
Yeah, I guess it depends on whether or not Rodrigo gets injured, right? Because if Rodrigo gets injured at any point in the season, you would expect maybe a Click Roberts midfield, with Roberts being the more attacking of the two, and so then the question sort of becomes whether or not Roberts can pick those goals up. I noticed that you've gone for Roberts, Darren. I know that you are an iconoclastic man, but what's your reasoning behind this?
Yeah, pretty similar to that, really. That I suspect that Rodrigo will miss some chunks of the season. I think Tyro will get a good number of minutes. Some of those will be at 9, and I think I don't think he's going to score absolutely tons of goals, but I'm pretty confident that he might get 5 or 6 across the season. And if Click's playing in a slightly more withdrawn role, then I suspect that he'll get fewer goals, and he's not going to be on Click won't be on penalties this year, I wouldn't have thought, given the one that he missed against West Ham. So with all that in mind, I think that it'll be fairly close, but I'm pretty happy for Roberts to come out on top with that one.
One of the interesting stats from last season was that Jack Harrison scored 8 goals and got 8 assists, and so that is the basis of our next question, which will happen more, assists from Jack Harrison or goals from Jack Harrison? Jacob Stambridge, what's your take?
I went with assists. My main reason for that was I was having a browse back through some of the stats earlier, and I think he was second only to Dallas in terms of XG over performance last season. And so my logic was maybe some of those long-range goals don't go in. He doesn't whack that goal in against Newcastle again. And whereas I think I didn't look at his expected assists or anything, but I feel like a lot of the things that he assists become higher value chances just from the way that we quite often like to build the attacks. And so my thought was that those things were probably more likely to go in regularly.
Was it last season? I think he was quite high in the league as well, either for expected assists or it might have just been chances created. I can't remember. I think I remember seeing like a graphic and it was him and De Bruyne were near the top, which sort of to add on to what Jacob said, that kind of suggests to me that he's going to get more assists than goals when you take out a couple of those long shots not going in.
Yeah, I can't remember what his expected goals figures were, but I have a feeling that he maybe overperformed quite considerably. Just thinking some of the goals that he did score were quite nice. The Liverpool goal was fairly low percentage chance, so I suspect he probably performed his expected goals, but probably came out fairly square with his expected assists, which is why I've gone for assists. But did anyone go for goals out of interest?
Darren just went for Jack.
Yeah, that was because the question got changed at the last minute, you fuckers.
I think it's pretty clear that Jack will be the winner of this one either way.
Jack
so you are right.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
No one's going to go for goals, presumably, then.
I think he'll have a decent season again in terms of goal scoring. I think it'd be broadly similar, but I actually expect him to get a couple more assists this year. So yeah, I've gone with assists.
Yeah, nice. Pascal Strauch, the patron saint of the All Stats Aren't We channel. He's maybe a bit too young to be a patron saint, I don't know, but we had to throw him in here. A player who's had a very solid pre-season indeed. The question we've got is, what is going to come first, Pascal Strauch's international call-up or his first goal? I think did he get a couple of goals last season? He certainly got one. Got one. Yeah, he got one not in a cup competition, but maybe in a...
He got one in a pre-season game against Pacos de Ferreira.
Right. And he got one in pre-season this time around as well, if I'm correct. Not that I've memorized Pascal Strauch's stats. Everyone has gone for goal here, no doubt, because it's fairly unlikely that he's going to get his international call-up, I think, given what we saw going into the Euros. Although, having said that, there are a number of international breaks coming up. I think there's 2 or 3 certainly coming up in, I think is it October, November, the 2 international breaks. So there's a possibility he might get called up for one of those 2, especially the way that he's been performing recently. Who wants to wax lyrical about Pascal? Darren, I can see you've unmuted yourself, so I'm going to assume that you are ready, you're primed to go.
No, I think he's going to have an absolutely massive season. I think he's had a really good pre-season. He looks incredibly sharp. I think he looks a bit more confident in terms of the possession stuff, which I think is really good. The reason I've gone for goal is because I think he's going to thunder in a last-minute header at Old Trafford for the winner, sending thousands and thousands and thousands of Leeds fans into raptures. But yeah, I think he's going to have a great season, and there's every chance that he could get an international call-up this year. And I don't think he has declared for a country yet, has he?
I don't think he has. I think the assumption was that he was holding out for the Netherlands, and the Netherlands are fairly stacked when it comes to centre backs at the moment. I'm pretty sure if he declared for Belgium, he would probably get straight into the team, which would be a wonderful thing. But yeah, we wait and see for that.
And can I say regarding the patron saint, Maria Goretti, an Italian girl, was canonized at the age of 12, so 11, in fact, 11. And she is the patron saint of crime victims, teenage girls, and modern youth.
Don't get that on the square ball, do you?
They have some religious baton that gets passed around, don't they?
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, other Leeds podcasts are available. I thought you were going to pop up and say something about him declaring for Indonesia, Tom, because
I would love him to declare for Indonesia. I would absolutely fucking love it.
As I've said, you do have this fascination with the players who could represent smaller nations on the world stage, the biggest stage of all, in fact. So, anyone else want to say anything about the boy Pask?
I was just going to say, I think he missed quite a lot of big chances from set pieces last season. So I think I think he just likely to get a few more goals next year. More, that's me probably being an optimist, but he was always, to me, I don't know if anyone agrees, but he always seemed to be our biggest threat from set pieces over the season. I always felt like when he played, we had a lot more chance to score.
He certainly absolutely rammed that goal against Arsenal into the top corner from a corner kick. So hopefully we'll see more of that this season. The final, well, we've got a couple more questions on the squad side of things, but we have another centre-back question, and this time it's just focusing on the right centre-back conundrum. So question 15, who's going to get more appearances, Robin Koch or Diego Llorente at right centre-back? Who wants to kick off on this? I think this is maybe a little bit closer than maybe people would have thought, given that there was that injury to Llorente pre-season. So there's the possibility, at least, that Koch might start there, might prove to be difficult to upend from there. Yeah, Jacob, what's your take on this? Who do you think is going to get the more appearances?
With what you were just saying, I imagine that scenario could well happen. In fact, I think it probably will. The reason, though, that I went for Llorente is my previously mentioned sort of pessimism about the availability of Calvin and the feeling that it's most likely Robin Koch that will get pulled up to cover that position. I guess it's possible if Llorente is already injured at the same time, then you could see Strout going up there. But yeah, that was sort of the thing that informed my logic. I think it's quite possible that they do make similar amounts of appearances throughout the season, like they did this season. But yeah, that was it for me for Llorente.
Darren, you've gone the other way. I think everyone else went for Llorente. You've gone for Koch. What's your thinking behind this?
Yeah, just he's starting the season there in all likelihood because of Llorente's injury, and I think once Bielsa's team gets into a groove and he feels like his 11 is settled, I think he kind of quite rarely changes it. I think Jacob's point about Calvin is a really fair one, and I think that is the kind of unknown factor in kind of my decision making around that, really. But yeah, I think Koch will get a really good run there at the start of the season, all things being equal.
Yeah, does anyone want to talk about Robin Koch and I guess the Robin Koch conundrum, really, that he was brought in as the starter at right centre back and then obviously had that injury, and so we brought Llorente in quite late in the window, and now there's the question about who has I guess it's further up the hierarchy than the other. Does anyone have any thoughts on that in particular?
It's an interesting one because I always felt, and I think we mentioned this on the podcast in the past, that Koch was an auto signing, whereas Llorente's a Bielsa signing. So I would guess, if I was to guess, I would say because Llorente ended the season there, and I think he's favoured by Bielsa, he probably would be the first choice. But yeah, I think what you guys have all said, I think with Koch starting the season there, I think he might get a run there and find it hard for Llorente. Well, Llorente might find it hard to come back in.
Unmuted. Yeah, and sorry, Zach Palmer there saying, any concern about the fact that Koch has mostly been playing midfield recently? Will he take some time to settle into that role again? I think the pre-season is really interesting from this perspective because obviously we've seen that Koch was presumably being trialed out in that defensive midfield role, and then Llorente has picked up that injury, and so I think that sort of reshuffles everything, and we're going to end up, I don't know, with questions to be asked at least about how that everything fits together. I know a lot of the fan base are pretty keen on Llorente, but my suspicion is that we'll slowly see Koch usurp Llorente this season. Maybe injury dependent, but I think that because Llorente will pick up injuries, and I think Koch will be a little bit more consistent. It will just be just simply a question of who has the fewer injuries in that regard. Anyone have anything else to add on this one?
I think the only thing I'd say is that Koch, when he first came in, I was quite underwhelmed with him on the ball, like at the beginning of last season. I think that's partially because we'd come from Ben White, who was obviously incredibly good on the ball, so it seemed like a step down. But what I'm half wondering is whether his appearances in midfield might have helped in that regard. He's certainly looked a little more comfortable passing to me in his appearances in midfield than he has in his appearances at the back, and I wonder if that experience of seeing what it's like in the midfield will maybe help him in terms of his distribution when he moves back again.
Yeah, we've certainly seen both of those centre-backs, both Koch and Pascal, I think, being way more progressive in a lot of respects. Even someone like Cooper, I think last season, on the progressive side of things was remarkably good. Cooper's obviously a much more high volume progressive player, but I think when I was looking at the Transfer Lab metrics where they try and put values on progressive passing, Cooper was definitely up there with the rest of the centre backs in terms of the value that he adds just through his long passing. So yeah, I think part of the problem is that on this question, I think we've got four really good centre backs, and I think that because Llorente came in and we had that overperformance on at the second half of the season, there's this sort of assumption that was mainly down to Llorente, and I think that maybe clouds people's opinions on the other centre backs. I think the other centre backs are all of a pretty similar level. Obviously, Cooper is on the decline, and I suppose the question is how long Llorente can last as well this season, given that we've seen him injured quite a bit in his time at Leeds. So for me, I think this all just comes down to who's going to be fittest for the longest. But I don't want to get us mired down in centre back problems because I know people get annoyed when we talk about centre back. So we'll move on to one final question about squad players. I know we've got two final questions about squad players. First one is under 23 senior appearances. So that's players who are getting the majority of their appearances for the under 23s, who then come on to make appearances for Leeds, versus junior Firpo games missed to injury. A little bit of tongue in cheek this one. So yeah, who wants to kick off on this one?
23s will have more appearances than junior will miss games to injuries. In my view,
who do you think's going to be? Who do you think are going to be those players who get those performances?
Shackleton played more minutes for the 23s last season than he did for the first team. So on that basis, that's kind of, he's going to take a big chunk of them. I think Greenwood will get get some minutes. And I think there'll be an outlier, and I'm not quite sure who it is. But I think maybe Gelhardt will come through. But I think principally it'll be between Shackleton and Greenwood. And I suppose it depends on whether Meslier ever gets injured. I hope not, please God, no. And whether we count. It depends where Christopher Claassen plays his football this season as well, whether he plays minutes for the 23s, and I suspect that he might. So I think you might get a couple of games there as well, because it's quite rare that even a goalkeeper goes through a whole season without an injury.
It also seems like maybe Somerville has leapt ahead of Poveda in the pecking order, and he seems more the kind of player that would get 10 minutes at the end of a lot of games just because he's so direct and dribbling and he's a really good dribbler. I mean, Poveda is a decent dribbler, but in a very different way, a more kind of a less pacey way, I guess, and a less kind of a way that's less likely to cause chaos. So I could see Somerville being brought on as a kind of last gasp when we've sort of run out of ideas a little bit. And seeing as you've asked about appearances rather than minutes, something like that could also contribute quite a lot. And basically, I'm just hoping that Filippo is actually okay and not crocked.
Yeah, I think the indication is that this is just a knock rather than anything more worrying. But he has had some bad injuries in the past, so I guess this is a question of whether or not he could stay fit for the whole season. And yeah, if he does get another knee injury or whatever it is he's had in the past, then obviously that makes it game over for the under 23s appearances, I think. But I'm aware of the time, so let's just move on. I'm going to skip will I skip that question? I'll skip the last question. We'll go with this one. So 17. We did a combined shirt numbers question last time around, which is fun. So we've done another one. So the shirt numbers are Forshaw, Poveda, and Costa add up to 28. So Forshaw is 4, Poveda is 7, and Costa is 17. Last season, Poveda and Costa got 36 appearances between them. Obviously, Forshaw didn't get any. So the question this time around is: this season, do we think that number will remain higher than the combined number of shirt, or the combined shirt total for those three players? So I guess the big question is here is: 1, does Poveda go on loan? 2, does Adam Forshaw get a single appearance? And 3, what happens with Costa? Who wants to kick off on this?
Do their shirt numbers remain if they do leave? They still get added into the total?
That's a good question, actually. Yeah, maybe they won't. If they go off on loan, then I suppose the squad shirt numbers will be reassigned, so they probably won't have a shirt number, which is a very good question. I don't know. Yes, they become 0 if they aren't there, which seems fair, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. In that case, I might change my answer. I was going to go for shirt numbers, but I think, no, I don't know.
Poveda's going to go, and Costa's going to leave, and so the question is: Will Forshaw get more than 4 appearances?
Go on, I'll change it. Yeah. I reckon Forshaw is going to come off the bench exactly 5 times.
That's a very romantic answer.
Anyone else like to agree with that? Actually, I think Forshaw can eke out 5 appearances next year. Fingers crossed. But I think we said that for the last 2 years, haven't we?
He'll get 10 minutes. He'll get 15 minutes. Then he'll get a second half in a cup and get injured. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to add to this? So in terms of Poveda, it seems as though Somerville has maybe usurped him in the pecking order, which I think on the basis of pre-season is probably fair. I've never been a particular believer in Poveda, and I would be at least happy to experiment to see what Somerville can do in the senior game. And then the other question is with Costa, and I suppose that depends on whether or not we bring in another winger and what we do there. So anyone got any thoughts on either of those two things?
I think it is likely that Poveda will go out on loan, and I think that's absolutely right and proper, because if Somerville's moved ahead of him here, he's the sort of player that does need to be getting first team minutes to develop. I think Costa may end up staying around for the season. I've just got a little hunch that he'll still be here and still be being criticised with reckless abandon by every Leeds fan on Twitter as soon as he comes on. But I think he will be around. I don't expect him to have a huge impact on the season. So I think the shirt numbers will win.
Right, we should move on. Before we close out this episode, we should talk about the opening game of the season, which is happening on Saturday at a lunchtime kickoff, I believe, which I know a lot of people feel a little bit nervous about. I think that's 12:30 kickoff at Old Trafford against Manchester United. So we're going to do a quick preview here. What I should say before I start this is that we have moved our preview shows, the full preview shows, onto our Patreon. I will be speaking to Maram Al-Bahana, who you may know as Maram per 90, who is a Manchester United pundit, often seen on Twitter. I'm interviewing her tomorrow, and the full audio of that will be on that show. So if you want to get the preview shows this season, you'll have to tune in and sign into the Patreon account. But we will talk a little bit about it, things here. Manchester United, already mentioned by maybe Tom Woodhead, that they have, in the last few seasons anyway, had a slower start to the season. I think, was it last season where they started up against Brighton maybe, and they nearly lost and came back late on. I can't remember if that was the first game of the season, but it was definitely near the beginning of the season. So I suppose the big question is, one, they brought in a lot of big players. Will those big players be ready? They brought in Rafael Varane. They brought in Jadon Sancho. Will those big players be fit and ready to go? There's questions about where players like Pogba will be. Will he still be at the club, etc. And there's the inevitable questions about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Can he get the most out of that team? Will they cause us the sorts of problems that they caused us when we played them at Old Trafford last time? Or will it be a case of maybe a slightly more solid and stodgy game that we saw at Elland Road? So who wants to kick off talking about Manchester United? Jacob, what's your thoughts on the Manchester United game this weekend?
So there's been a lot of talk about them potentially changing sort of formation over the summer, and instead of playing that 4-2-3-1, playing something maybe that's more like a 4-1-4-1 or a 4-3-3 in order to get Bruno and Pogba or Bruno and Donny van de Beek both in the midfield together. And the Manchester United fans who I do follow seem to be quite pessimistic about that and don't think that whoever they have as the single deeper midfielder will be capable of doing the requisite defensive work to cover for those players. And so, whereas I think that particularly in the 6-2, that there was a huge amount of value they accrued from those players striding from deep, that McTominay and Fred, they won't be able to necessarily do that if this sort of system changes. So that's a particular thing that I wanted to pick out. And then from the sounds of it, from what Solskjaer was saying, I'm not sure that Varane or Sancho will necessarily start. And so while they may have that firepower, it might not be something that we see an awful lot of. Yeah.
I think those are very interesting points. What do people make of the difference between the 4-2-3-1 and the 4-3-3 or 4-1-4-1 as Leeds play against it? Is there one of those formations that we would prefer on the face of it?
I think the thing with the 4-4-4, well, with the 4-3-3 is that it matches up directly with our formation that we play against it. So I think it comes down even more to individual battles than it does when we're playing a 4-2-3-1, because the teams are already in attacking and defensive phases sort of set up in the same shape as each other. So there are a lot of individual duels that are going to be very important. I think it's interesting. The thing about the Solskjaer, you know, like if Leeds had signed Sancho, he might not even be on the bench for this game, but you know that he's going to be on the bench for Man United because Solskjaer is a heavy believer in moments and the magic of Manchester United and those magical moments when players come on and do something on the wing and all that bollocks. So that will be scary, I guess, if he comes on, because he's a very, very good winger, and I guess he plays from the right mostly, doesn't he? So it would probably be up against Stuart Dallas at left back, who is very good in a lot of ways, but I'm not sure his one-on-one defending at full back is necessarily the best. So that would be a little bit of a worry if Sancho does come.
Yeah, we've got this again from Zach Palmer, who says at home to Leeds is one of the only games Manchester United could play Pogba in double pivot. Rodrigo man marking him as a scary proposition, especially if Bruno can pull Calvin out of position. I guess the question is, are we expecting to see Calvin? I think there's been an interesting pre-season from him insofar as it's seemed very much to me as though he had a big holiday after the Euros, and he hasn't really been up to speed since then. So are we expecting Calvin on the weekend, or do we think it could be Robin Koch, or is that going to be kiboshed by the fact that we're already short on centre backs, Darren?
Yeah, I think Llorente's injury is going to force our hand there and mean that we do, in all likelihood, see Calvin. I suppose if Shackleton hadn't picked up that injury, which is likely to put him out of the first game as well, we might have seen Luke Ayling move to right centre back and Shackleton play at right back. But as it is, I suspect it will be Calvin that plays, and I just hope that he's putting some hard yards in this week to try and get himself ready.
Yeah. And so I guess it sort of feels as though we're sort of caught between this idea that Manchester United could be there for the taking, given it's the beginning of the season, but also worries that actually, in terms of the beginning of the season for us, there are a few worrying realities there in terms of just availability and maybe not being quite as sharp as we would have wanted to be in pre-season. Although I think the Villarreal game did show that against certain teams, our press can be functional. Manchester United, though, I suppose worryingly enough, given the Ajax game, where Ajax I thought were quite smart in how they moved our midfield around in particular, and moved our defence around actually with their forward players dropping quite deep, did prove that you can move Leeds around and make their press look a little bit silly. Happened quite a bit actually in the Old Trafford game versus Manchester United last season, with I think particularly Bruno Fernandes pulling Calvin Phillips around a lot at the beginning of that game, and Calvin Phillips was actually hooked in the second half in that game. I think off the back of that. So I suppose that compared to what happened with the second game, which albeit was Manchester United just before a fairly important European Cup fixture, and so they did rest a few players. They didn't play Cavani in that game. They didn't play Pogba. They brought them on quite late. Ended up being quite a stolid 0-0 draw. Which one of those are we expecting to see, Tom Alderson? Do you think that we'll see a game where United Manchester United, I should say, try and pull teams around, Leeds around, or is it going to be maybe a little bit more of a solid affair from Leeds with Dallas maybe sitting a little bit more zonally in the midfield?
I think because I don't think Firpo is going to play, I think it's going to be Dallas at left back, in which case it's going to be Rodrigo and Klick in centre mid, which is a pretty scary prospect considering how it went last time that when we played like that at Old Trafford. So I think because of that, they might be Man United might be able to just move us around almost like with ease. But the only thing I think we've got in our favour is I think we might see a team from Man United that is like similar to what they played in that second game, and that's despite them like not playing as strong a team. I think because we haven't got Dallas, we probably won't have Dallas in that zone. Phillips probably won't be up to speed. It does worry me that they'll be able to move us around with ease, and I think that they will. Like I'm not very optimistic about this game personally, because of those reasons. I
think the only thing I'd say is that this is that 6-2 was the ultimate game state Klaxon game, wasn't it? Like we conceded in the first minute, and then the third minute, was it? Or it was something really stupid like that. And once you're 2-0 down that early on, the only thing to do is go even more gung-ho, because certainly a team like Leeds aren't going to pull 2 goals back without committing loads and loads of bodies forward, I don't think. So that game could have been... I'm not saying we would have won. I'm not saying we would have even come particularly close to winning necessarily. But if we hadn't conceded those 2 goals so early, I think it's doubtful that they would have scored 6.
I think all the indications from pre-season are that Bielsa's trying to get the press working again. In a way that it didn't really work at the end of last season. So I think we'll see a full-blooded commitment to that as an approach at Old Trafford on Saturday. And as John likes to say, inshallah.
Yeah, well, I haven't said it this episode yet, but yeah, very much a case for the phrase.
Absolutely.
I think we'll leave. Yeah. I think we'll leave it there for this, because I don't want to go on too much with the negativities at the end. But if you do want to get the full preview episode, then it will be on our Patreon by Wednesday or Thursday at the latest. So do check out our Patreon at www.patreon.com/allstats aren't we, if that interests you. I should say we've already mentioned that Tom Alderson has a piece coming out, I think, later in the week on set pieces, which will be good. Just looking back over the data from last season, which is quite insightful, and it's quite hard to get hold of set piece data. So lots of interesting stuff in there. But other than that, I think we should draw this to a close. Thank you very much for listening, staying with us, guys. The guys who are still here, and thank you to you four for coming on and chatting. But I will end this broadcast now, and we will chat to you later in the week.